Hi, I'd like to welcome everyone to another edition of Conversations about Art. I'm Alan Constant. I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I'm here with Paul Rowland, who lives in Tokyo, Japan. Today, we're going to be talking to Meighan Morrison, an abstract painter from Bridgeport, Connecticut. So I'd like to welcome you, Meighan.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Glad to have you. I'd like to start off by asking you about how you got started in art and how long you've been doing art and whatever art education you've had.
Sure. So I was always interested in art, but as kids were all interested in art, but it kind of stuck with me. And then I wanted to go study art after high school. Not a very popular decision with parents and guidance counselors, but I did end up going to Boston University School of Fine Arts for a year, which was fine, but it wasn't. I didn't find it very um, exciting, I guess. It was a lot of draw this orange over and over again, which is important. But anyways, I had a friend who said one day, also in the same program, I'm going to apply to Parsons. I'm going to go to Parsons. And I said, "What's Parsons?" And she said, "Parsons is the best art school in the country, in my opinion. And it's in New York City and it's much more fun. So that's where I'm going to go." So I said, "Okay, I'm going to go there too." So basically, I wound up at Parsons for my second year. And I did find that a lot more challenging and a lot more interesting and fun. And in fact, for my junior year, I had applied to do a semester in Paris, and unfortunately, that was canceled because there were some bombings in the student district. So the school wouldn't let anyone go, insurance or something. So I found myself without an apartment, so I couldn't go back to Parsons in New York. So I ended up going to LA because they had a thing with their sister school, which was Otis uh, Art School or whatever they called it back then. I don't even know if it exists. And I did that. But anyways, I was very fragmented in my early education, and I ended up not finishing. And then I wound up in New Zealand at 22 with a boyfriend, and then we were married, and I had a baby at 23. So I didn't know what I was going to do. We ended up on a farm in New Zealand, and I hadn't finished my art education, and there was nothing to do out there but the farm. So I ended up fooling around with some children's books illustration. I thought that would be cool, but I had nothing to illustrate. So I wrote a children's book and it got rejected a bajillion times, but finally got picked up and was published. So I really started my art career, I guess, if you call it that, with that first children book that I published, and it was published by the New Zealand branch of Scholastic Publishers. So that was neat. And it was actually, it was all quilted. So it was kind of like a collage of fabric. And I did another book, another again with fabric. But then I wound up being divorced and moving back to the States, and I really needed a job. I needed income. And here I didn't have a degree. I had done these children's books, but it's not quick money or monthly money. It's just, it's not sustainable. So I went to night school. I ended up moving to San Francisco, and I went to a night course of textile design and put together through that a kind of a little portfolio of these textile designs I had done, which are really just paintings that you then put into repeat. So when it goes through a mill, it's a big design made up of a small design that kind of interlocks together on the edges. And I was able to get a job in New York, and so I moved to New York, and I did that for many years. Um, that was an interesting job because I was able to do a lot of different things. We did florals, we did abstracts, we did, so it was a good kind of arts education in itself, just the textile design. And then that fell apart actually because they did, what was it, NAFTA, whatever that thing was, where they opened up all the trade. So basically, we used to print all the fabric down, and the designers would take turns going down to print. And so we'd go down to South Carolina, mostly the Carolinas, where they had these big mill towns. But then all of a sudden, all of the printing went overseas, like literally to like Timbuktu, like it was China, it was here, it was there. And they wanted me to go and print instead of for like 5 days at a time. They wanted me to go for 3 weeks or so. And I was a single mom at the time, and I couldn't do that. So I got out of that business and I got into kind of interior design, did a little graphic design, just basically anything in the creative world that I could pick up and piece together. Because I didn't have a degree in art or anything else. So I just kind of fell into this hodgepodge of creative roles. And then eventually, when my daughter, I have two children, but when my daughter got to be high school age, I started painting again. And I hadn't painted in years. So I did it on the side. I'd say that was probably around like uh, 2005 to 2010. I was fooling around, and then I was working with a lot of interior designers little later than that, and some of them knew I painted. Then a couple of them bought a few pieces. Then a couple of stores in town took some of my work. So it was really just, there was no plan. It just kind of happened, and all of a sudden it's 30, 40 years ago. And so that's really the beginning of my abstract work. Did not start until probably about 10 years ago. I started painting, abstractly, which is when things started to get some momentum. And in 2016 or 2017, I quit my job and I started doing it full time. So that's how I got from there to here, I guess.
So I noticed on your website quite a few of your pieces have been sold. So you are able to keep the momentum going.
Well, so far so good. Knock on wood, literally. You just don't know from year to year. And the strangest thing happened. I'd been doing it, 2017, 2018, 2019 on a shoestring, just doing it full time as my main, and I didn't have a side job for the first time, but it was hard. There was not a lot of money coming in. And sometimes I was literally like, I've got to sell something because X is due and I've got to pay it. And then the pandemic hit, and I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? And I was really, really panicked. And then I couldn't even go to my studio because that was sort of, shut down. It was a public. And so I went and I got what I could and I brought it to my apartment, and I kind of started working on smaller pieces here and was panicked. And then it turned out, as a lot of artists, I think, also have found, that it was one of the best years for art because everyone else was stuck at home and everyone else was on the computer and everyone else was thinking, geez, why didn't we ever get something for above the fireplace? And so I felt almost guilty that I actually did very well in 2020 and it continued into 2021. Um, and, so it definitely helped with my momentum. Also, what helps, it's a love-hate relationship, of course, especially nowadays. But I started Instagram, I think back in 2016, I opened an account. My friend kept telling me, you've got to do Instagram. And I was like, no. And I finally did. And I'm really glad I did because a lot of my work comes from people who find me on Instagram. And then apparently people pin things to Pinterest from Instagram. And so things have a way of getting around. And yeah, so, and I do have a few galleries that I do work with, and all of them found me through Instagram. So I guess if it wasn't for Instagram and the pandemic, I don't know what I would be doing. So, anyways.
Well, thanks for sharing all that with us. I think we'd like to take a look at your work now. I know you did some portrait work I saw on your website and some early landscapes. I just want to take a brief look at this early work because to me it seems like a precursor to your more current work. So, about what year were these pieces made?
These were probably like 2010 or something like that, 2009-ish, um, somewhere around there. Yeah, when I was in California, I did go back to school part-time and I I don't know who the instructor was, but he was fantastic and he set up models in a very chiaroscuro way or whatever that word is. So there was a lot of dark and light and shadows. And so I really liked painting the figure from life and drawing the figure from life. But then when I was no longer had a model available, I was like, oh, what am I going to do? So I started fooling around with these landscapes, and they're just really out of memory or out of imagination. And so the portraits were first, and then came the landscapes.
And how big are these pieces?
Well, the one in the bottom right, that's the white clouds with the blue sky. That was pretty big. That was probably 48 by 36 or something. And then the one in the top left, that was little. That was probably only 12 by 12 or something. And the other two are kind of in between. They're probably like 36 or 48 by something high, 30 high or something like that. So yeah, they go from small to fairly large. Not as big as the abstract I work on now, but so there was a range of sizing.
I mentioned these seem to me to be like a precursor to what you're doing now. Is that kind of the way you see these?
That's absolutely what happened. They sort of started getting looser and looser and looser. And then I remember the first thing I did that I would call quote unquote abstract, even though it wasn't totally abstract, it was called Night and Day. It was a diptych, and there were two large canvases, and I got a hold of some linen that I hadn't worked on before, just some rolls of linen, and I was fooling around. So I did something. I did two of them. One was night and one was day, and they were very abstract, just black and white on the linen. One obviously had more white, that was day, and night had more black. But that was sort of a bridge. Uh, that was the bridge from landscape to, the clearly abstract and definitely also much more monochromatic. I don't have those with me. They did sell, and I remember I was thrilled to sell them because I did them, and I thought, well, these are either good or they're terrible because I really didn't have a good handle on, I could tell when a landscape had worked and turned out, but it was my first go at doing something much more abstract. And so that kind of helped me say, okay, I'm going to keep going on this linen and see where I go.
And I also noticed on your website you have some medium-sized abstracts on paper.
I really love the accidental quality of these, the messiness, and the paper itself is just beautiful in and of itself. How did these come about?
Well, first, thank you. And these are recent. These are within the last year, if probably more recent than that. These came about just because I had found this paper that I thought was interesting. And, it's very irregular and kind of rugged. And it's smallish. It's probably 8.5 by 11 or something like that, like the size of a sheet of paper, if that. Um, so yeah, I really, really love, like you said, the accidental qualities. I love just kind of going blah, blah, blah and hoping for the best. But I find that when you're blah, blah, blahing, sometimes it's right out of the bottle, sometimes it's with a stick or a brush or your fingers. There is definitely, if you can let go, you can feel like something is almost guiding you. I don't know what it is, but you kind of just go with it. And more often than not, you're pleased when you come back to the studio next day and it's dried. I mean, occasionally I just rip something up and put it in the dumpster, but more often than not, I'll get something and then maybe go back in and layer it, do another wash or some acrylic or whatever. But these were pretty immediate, I would say. First, there was the splash of the darker ink right out of the bottle, and then I have a spray bottle and I throw water on it and sticks and I find that almost everything I do um, that's on paper, these smaller abstracts, to me look like portraits. Fairly regularly, somebody will catch on and they'll say, "Are these portraits?" And I'll say, "Kind of. I don't really go for a portrait, but I feel that they are kind of portraits." And then my current work, I first started doing on the linen, I did the day and night, which was still something. It was day and night. And then I got into doing really purely abstract. And then eventually things started coming through that didn't look purely abstract to me. And I tried to make that go away because I felt like I was going backwards. But eventually I just kind of went with it. And now my current work, there's definitely things going on in there. It's definitely an environment with things or people or some kind of something going on in there. Um,
Mm, mm,
but these, yeah, the paper things, I always feel come out looking like some kind of a portrait of something or someone.
mm.
These are actually bigger. This is the size of paper I usually work in. This is 22 by 30.
So on these particular pieces on paper, you seem to do them in pairs. At least the three examples we're looking at, they seem to be related to each other. Was there some reason behind doing them in pairs?
Not really. Often when I do paper paintings, I work on the floor, no matter what kind of material it is, it's on the floor. So the papers I'll just kind of maybe sometimes put out two or three, or sometimes I'll put out six or eight. Um, and the pairs or the triples usually come because it's just I'm doing this, it's all in the same moment. So I'm going from one paper to another. And then if I put another wash on top, I'm doing the same thing. So they end up looking related because they have the same palette, they have the same, it's in the same moment that it's happening. So sometimes it's a diptych or a triptych, sometimes there'll be three or four, and sometimes it's just one. It's not planned out ahead of time. It's very slapdash. Um, it's sort of the opposite process of my larger paintings because my larger paintings, I do sketches. I do little sketches until I get a composition that I like. And then I start with that. Sometimes it changes when I'm painting it, but sometimes usually it's recognizable from the sketch. These don't have anything. These are just fun.
They look kind of calligraphic to me. Was that your intention, or is it just kind of what came out?
Not really. I mean, I do like contrast, black on white or the black on the naturals. And the ink, the black ink is just India ink that comes in a big tube. A lot of people will say, it looks like Asian influenced and I definitely see that. It's not intentional, but maybe it's the India ink and maybe it's the gesture. I'm not sure.
Okay, Paul.
I'm really interested to hear how you work, putting stuff on the floor, like Jackson Pollock worked, and I can see these drips here as well. Can you tell us a bit more about your process and the tools and materials you use? I'm really interested to hear about the physical act of you making these things.
Sure. These two are kind of an anomaly. They're different than most of my work. They just happen to come out like that. The drips they were done on the floor. The drips are when I uprighted them, and then they drip down. Um, but again, it was just playing with ink and water, and gravity. If you tip it up, often I have a plastic tray that's just a little bit bigger than these papers. So these are 22 by 30, so it's a little bigger. And so I'll do something and I'll put it in the tray and I use the water to wash. Not here. This was pretty much a one-off. This happened in one go. But sometimes I will actually dunk things under the sink, under the spout, and so it can be a process of taking the ink off and then putting the ink on. But again, this was spontaneous and just the one go.
Okay, so now we're moving into your larger pieces, correct? This is a large piece.
Yep, that is a larger piece. Not as large as what I'm doing now. That one was probably something like 60 by 40 or something like that. And that was the time when I had, after I had done day and night, my first abstract paintings, but were not completely abstract, then I went into really trying to just do abstract, just focusing on shapes and marks and simplicity.
This one reminds me of Miro a little bit. So did you just jump in and start laying down paint and just trying different shapes?
Yeah. Yeah, this was before I even started uh, sketching, doing little sketches. This was purely just what am I going to do here? And going from, okay, now we have a box and now we have a line. Let's throw on something else. That's pretty much all that is. Just fooling around with shapes and marks. And now this one, it's funny because then I wasn't doing sketches, but I had pieces of cloth. Like I had like black pants. I had a couple pairs of black pants, and I would put the black pants, use the black pants as move around on the linen, just on the floor and fool around with that until I got sort of a shape or a design that I was interested in and I liked. And then I would take a little chalk and outline kind of the basics of what happened to the black pants or whatever it was that I was using. And so this was when I started having some uh, map, I guess, by using, you know, piece of fabric to fool around with before I painted.
Well, and on the left side of some of these black shapes, it almost looks like a shadow. So to me, it has like a three-dimensional feel, like the black shape is floating above the canvas. Was that intentional?
It wasn't intentional, but that you can see the beginnings of the ink, the brown, it's a little bit of brown ink that I had put down beforehand. So this was the beginnings of where I am now, which is really the earth toned inks, the black and the white. And sometimes there'll be a red or something, but so you can see the beginnings of I'm sort of discovering that here. And it does give it a dimension that the ink. Well, the ink I like because it soaks into the canvas, so it actually, becomes integrated with the fabric of the canvas, and then the black and the white sit on top. And when you're looking at them up close, it's a very different result.
I'm really intrigued by the size of these, and I just realized what some of these really big pieces remind me of, and your description of using textiles in the previous one to help you compose it reminded me of maybe scenery for a ballet or an opera. And I'm thinking of like Jean Cocteau, Stravinsky, Picasso. Maybe I'm getting that collection of artists wrong, but they would all work together to make a piece, an event. Because I'm seeing like a door or a surfboard in this or something. Why did you start to go really big like this? Like what do these things mean to you, these pieces? For me, they're like an entry point into a different world.
Well, to me, I didn't intentionally make it a door or a surfboard, but for me, it is like creating a little world,
Mm.
contained in the box, which is your four stretcher bars. But I see something that looks kind of like a bull here, some horns on the top, and this being the face, and the white being the body. Um, so to me, again, this is has a little bit of a representation to it, although I know that anybody else is going to see a million different things in it. But I started painting bigger and bigger. I just really enjoyed the drama of having something so simple, very simple materials, very simple color palette, and generally a pretty simple uh, compositions. And when they're so big, you almost, when you see them in person, you almost feel like you're in that
Hmm.
dimension, like it's a little other dimension or a little other world. And when they're as tall as you or taller, you do feel like you can step into them, or they might step out at you. So I think the size just helps them in that aspect, I guess, of making it feel like another world or another room or another someplace else.
And how large is this one?
Well, almost all of them are 80 inches wide because that's about the width of the roll. The roll's like 86 inches, and then I have to wrap them. So they almost all wind up being 80 inches wide. And then this one is probably 68 or 70 tall.
I want to ask you about your color palette because, as you mentioned, it's very simple, earth tones and almost monochromatic for the most part, except for a little bit of red or blue here and there. So, um, is that to limit your choices, or is there a philosophy behind the simple palette that you use?
Well, I think it's just very, I feel like it's organic and it's timeless, and it has a kind of a primitive quality. Um, and it just keeps it simple. It forces me to focus on um, the shapes, and I very much like the simplicity of it, especially when it's, you know, at large, when they're very big. I mean, I have a history of color. I was with all the landscapes, but there's something um, calming about it being just a limited palette to me. It's calming, it's simplistic, kind of brings you back to basics, a basic place in us all, I think, somewhere.
In this one, I noticed there's a lot of shapes you use that are similar. Is there like a symbolism that keeps coming up in your work?
None of it is academic or intellectual or thought out. There are just certain shapes I like. There's certain shapes I'll stumble upon, certain shapes I'll use over and over again. Some of them we haven't seen one yet, but sometimes it'll look like a writing or some kind of a communication, but it's, ineligible. So yeah, there's nothing specific. I'm not using symbols that mean anything. I'm just mixing up marks and shapes that um, please me for whatever reason. And yeah, some of them do definitely repeat, like just a simple cross. Very very basic shapes. It's sort of, you know, it goes back to children's markings, cave wall markings, just simple marks that throughout centuries, people have scratched into this or that. I'm just continuing the scratching, I guess, because it really doesn't mean anything specific.
And again, on the tools that you use, like on the big black shapes, do you use like a wide brush and just slather the paint on? I mean, is that how you apply it?
Yeah, I just have a collection of very scratchy old brushes. Some of them are, a foot wide, 6 inches to a foot wide. And then with the black and white line work, I just use the end of what are those things you stir paint with, the sticks or whatever's, um, might make a good mark.
I'm really getting a sense, kind of like I said before, these being, like sort of like stage scenery for a drama or a play. Um, I feel like I'm in a maybe German expressionist film or something, and I'm feeling really immersed. I would love to be in a gallery surrounded by all of these. And I love asking this question, what would your ideal exhibition with unlimited space, unlimited resources, what would it look like?
Oh my gosh. I'd never thought of that. Should I be so lucky? I guess it's just my pieces are so big. I haven't had a chance to I've had a showing with maybe 5 or 6 of the big pieces and then some small ones mixed in. But yeah, it would be fun to have, you know, 20 of them or something that you could have kind of hanging out together because I do see them as creatures or something, kind of friends or something. Like they're definitely, to me, some sort of entity that's alive or whatever the word is. I see, creatures, and sometimes it looks like you're underwater. Sometimes it's a dark sky, sometimes, but they're definitely something walking around somewhere to me or swimming around. I remember when I was a kid, I was maybe 7 or 8 or 9, and somebody had given me a butcher block, on a big roll, like a huge roll of paper, which was probably 2 feet by, I don't know, 100 feet. And me and a childhood friend, we just had fun drawing things on it. We just started drawing, and then we started drawing these little creatures and little monsters, and I'd forgotten about that and still until I started painting this way a couple years ago. All of a sudden, I had this memory that I had never thought about before of that butcher block roll of paper and all the little funny monsters and creatures we had just together drawn. And I really thought, like, this is somehow related, like subconsciously. I'd never thought of it for 50 years. But maybe that was the beginning of this. And as crazy as that sounds, I see a connection there. Um, yeah. So they are, childlike. I could see, obviously, and perhaps that's where the seed got planted, and then took 50 years to go to the next incarnation.
Yeah, Paul mentioned boat-like shapes, but these actually look like flying creatures to me. Now that I
Yeah,
look at it.
I see this as some kind of nest, and these are some kind of cow or some kind of something. But they're able to do things, obviously, that we can't do here. Maybe they're flying, or maybe they're just drawn on a wall. I don't know. Um, and these almost look like legs to me. So they're just funny, make believe animals, creatures, things.
Both in this one and the previous one, in the earth tone colors, there's a little bit of translucent, let me try to say that word again, translucency. Did you use your water technique to thin out the paint on this, or how did you achieve that?
Well, the brown is ink. Um, so I always start with the ink. So I'll roll out the linen on the roll on the floor, and I'll mix up ink in a big container, and I just basically throw it on the
Mm.
um, linen, and I have a squeegee or brushes that I'll push it around with. And I really just try to be random. And then I go home, and the next day I come back and it's dried. And you never quite know what you're going to get because when it's wet, it looks very dark. And then when you come back, it might have dried darker or lighter. Um, so that's always a surprise. And then what I do is having that started, then I start my little sketches of just general shapes and outlines, and then those are painted on top of the ink.
Well, and since the pieces are so big, what do you use the sketching with? Do you like some kind of graphite pencil or something bigger than that?
I use just chalk, just
Oh,
chalkboard
chalk.
chalk.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
And then if I've already got white painted down, I'll just use a little charcoal stick on the white, and then on the tan. It's just chalk.
I wanted to ask you about the role of, spontaneity and the accident and surprise. It's clearly very, very important to you. Is it kind of like a release from maybe more, commercial graphic art that you had to do before for money?
No, absolutely. I mean, I spent most of my life creating things that other people wanted me to do. Uh, so it was freeing just to be able to start doing the landscapes just out of my head, and then this is even more so. And I found it kind of thrilling to be able to just blop, 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 see where the marks went, make it very raw and unthought out, and yet in the end have something that I liked and that, miracle of all miracles, other people seem to like. Yeah, so I'm still surprised. I'm still surprised that people look at this and they think, I like this, because it's kind of weird. And so sometimes I feel like I can't believe I'm getting away with this. So, anyways.
But there is a childlike quality to it that I think appeals to people. Where did the color come from? Suddenly we've got this red. Have you experimented with any other colors?
Not really. If I have an accent color, I started experimenting with the red because I feel that red is another very primal color. It's not purple. And it holds up to black and white. And I like the way it looks against the brown because that keeps it kind of earthy looking still to me. So like this one I had not planned to put those red, whatever they are down there. But I finished the painting. I had done sketches and then I painted it and then I lived with it for a few days or a week and it just it wasn't clicking for me. Um, so I went back to my sketches and I added something like that and that ended up being added to it. And you'll see it occasionally like this. And usually when there is a red, it's because I get done and I think, maybe try some color. So again, it's not very planned out. It's kind of going from one A to B to C until you feel like, okay, I either like it or at least it's not bothering me anymore.
So is this 80 inches by 80 inches?
I think so, yes.
So I'm trying to think physically how you do this on the floor. I mean, because 80 inches is taller than most people. I mean, isn't it a little awkward getting to the middle of the piece?
No, I mean you can walk. I walk on the linen. The linen is actually, very durable and sturdy. It's hard, you can take a knife to it, but if you're just walking on it, in stocking feet, it's fine. So it's just, I walk on it. I get where I need to go on it and paint, just as if it's the floor or something.
But I love the idea of you walking. It's like walking into the painting. It's like you're so physically involved with it, that it creates a very compelling image of the artist at work.
Thank you.
I feel like you've gone back to landscape here. I can see this mountain, maybe some sort of industrial structure, like the remnants of like an oil well or something. I feel like I'm somewhere I don't really know. My American geography is not very good, but what inspired this piece? What did you feel when you were working on it? What were you thinking about, if anything?
Well, to me, this one is kind of aggressive to me, and I know that this was recent, and with all that's been going on, and again, I don't really start out thinking I'm going to do X or Y, but when I posted it on Instagram, somebody commented, "Oh, this is Bad Bunny with a pistol or a handgun," and I thought, yeah, I mean, I think that is. I mean, this is somebody, this is almost an arm or a limb and it looks aggressive to me. This is almost like an eye. Um, so this was definitely painted. I don't paint politically or have a message, but sometimes current events or personal feelings will come out in what I'm doing. Sometimes things seem happy-go-lucky, and other times things seem a little more, like I said, aggressive or dark. And this to me would be one of those paintings. But I do see what you're talking about. It almost looks like a mountain behind him, and then the white is the sky. So there's definitely a landscape quality going on to this. And I think when I had done it, I before I added this line work on the side, I remember thinking it looked too human to me. So I think this was added to take it away because I don't want to be painting people per se. Um, so that helped it to take it back to something that was unidentifiable, less identifiable.
Also like to comment on the emotions, the feelings. We haven't talked about that so much so far, but there's clearly there are clearly different emotions coming from each of these pieces. So it's interesting to hear that that was something you felt as the when you were making it as well.
Definitely mood comes through. I don't know if it's anything more specific than that, but sometimes mood will come through.
Also, whenever I see someone painting large like this, I have to think they must be really confident in what they're doing because, if you don't sell the piece, it just takes up a lot of space and you got to store it. So, like when you approach a large piece of linen like this, do you have a sense of confidence in what you're doing?
Well, I think when I started painting big and I started painting abstract, it was very freeing. Like I said, I guess I'm getting away with this sort of thing. So now I try to put all of that out of my head, like, oh, this piece of linen costs how many hundreds of dollars? I just don't think about that at all. I just do it and I say kind of fuck it. And I just do it and I just hope for the best. And I know in the back of my head, God, if something terrible happened and I had to pack up my studio, I could rip them off the stretchers bars and roll them all up on something and take them with me if I had to. But I think that was the best lesson I learned, as one of the best lessons I learned, is that you just have to say F it sometimes and be willing to make a fool of yourself, waste materials, and just do it.
Megan, I just again would like to thank you for your willingness to talk with us and share your creative process. And um, and to me, large images, large paintings like this, it always commands attention. I mean, you can't just ignore them. And I was really happy to find you on Instagram.
No, it's a real pleasure to connect. So thank you for your time.
And thank you. Thank you so much. It's nice to have people interested. Wonderful. Thank you.